Hey everyone, I'm Scott and I'm back with another update in my recovery from MOGAD disease. So the first thing I want to talk about is the infection, which I mentioned in the previous episode. The infection got worse and a lot worse. I was initially given 14 days of antibiotics, and for the first 10 days it seemed like it was improving, but then it got worse very quickly in the last 4 days, and it got to the point where I was in a lot of pain and I had to go back to the doctors, who then, after doing a few tests, they referred me to the hospital. I actually went back to the hospital to the surgical assessment unit, which is only the second time I've been there since my original attack, morgantoid disease attack, and the transverse myelitis back in 2020. I arrived at the hospital and I had lots of blood tests, urine tests, ultrasound, and they believed it was an infection from self-catheterization. I mentioned in the previous episode about my morgantoid disease preventative treatment as a azathioprine. We increased the dose from 100 milligrams a day to 150 milligrams a day. And after mentioning that to the healthcare professionals at the hospital, they said that the increase of the dose likely contributed to it in some ways. I ended up having to spend the night at the hospital due to me having a really high temperature. And one of the concerns that they had is they thought it might be sepsis, which could have gotten really nasty if that was the case. But thankfully it wasn't. So the timing of all this happening wasn't great either, as the overnight stay at the hospital, the next day after that was my birthday. I got woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning by a nurse singing happy birthday to me whilst doing the 4 hour observations. It was not a birthday to remember, I guess, in that regards. When I was there at the hospital, I was given IV antibiotics as well as the tablet form ones, and I also had to stop taking my azathioprine for 5 days whilst taking the antibiotics. This is because they thought that the azathioprine might have actually been competing a bit with the antibiotics due to it being an immunosuppressant. So they think it might have been not helping the antibiotics fix the infections. There was a concern that stopping the azathioprine could trigger a relapse of morgantoid disease. But thankfully, throughout all of this, I didn't have any issues with my morgantoid disease or the symptoms or anything. I was quite lucky in that regard. So in the end, I ended up spending 2 days in total at the hospital. I spent one night on the surgical assessment unit and then I got moved to a ward the next day. Apart from that, 2 days in the hospital wasn't too bad. And then I was left with another 14-day course of antibiotics to take after that. I was also given some time off of work due to how ill I was, which helped with the recovery. And thankfully the infection improved and I didn't have any pain. But I did have to go back to the doctors a few weeks later as it felt like the infection had come back a bit. It had not gotten to the point where it was painful, but you could sort of tell there was something a little bit wrong. And I was getting a similar sort of symptoms as to what it was before I got the pain. So I ended up having to go back, and I've now been prescribed new antibiotics to help with the infection, which should hopefully be more effective. So I'm waiting to see how that goes, but so far it seems to be working. So the next update I have is that I actually had a neurology appointment in December. At the appointment, we spoke about the infection, and the neurologist said that the type of infection that I had was quite a tricky infection, and it could take a few months of antibiotics to fully clear it, which is not what I wanted to hear, but at least I know now what to expect in future if it does come back. I'm hopeful that now I know what the situation is, it will ever get to that point of being in pain and having to go back into the hospital again. At the appointment, I had another MOG antibody test. Generally, these take a couple of months for the results to come back, and they'll measure and see how much MOG antibodies there are in my blood. In the last two that I've had, the amount of MOG antibodies has decreased. The last result I had was a low positive, so I'm hoping this time that it will be negative or at least like a really low positive. And the last thing which we discussed at the appointment was the azathioprine preventative treatment, and we agreed that we would reduce the azathioprine dose from 150 milligrams a day back to the 100 milligrams a day, which I was taking previously. As ever since I've increased the dose, I seem to be getting ill a lot more and more regularly, and then had numerous infections now, which I never had any issues when I was on 100 milligrams. I asked why we decided to increase it to 150 milligrams, and apparently 150 milligrams is a standard dose of azathioprine they usually give. So I think it made sense to put me on the sort of standard dose, and then see what impact that had on the MOG antibodies. So when we get the results back from this test, we'll have to see if that was possibly affecting the results of that. But I think it made sense to drop down to the 100 milligrams. We also talked about what to do in terms of if I think I'm having a MOG antibody disease relapse, what do I do and what actions do I take? Infections are believed to be a possible cause of MOG antibody disease relapses. So I wanted to make sure that I had a plan in place just in case this infection, it did come back, or if it did trigger any issues with MOG antibody disease and what I needed to do. I'm going to be making a video about MOG antibody disease relapses really soon, sort of explaining this, what we believe the causes are. So stay tuned for that, as that'll be coming out hopefully pretty soon. The next appointment with a neurologist, I believe, is going to be in April 2023. So hopefully by then I will have the results of the MOG antibodies test, and we can discuss like the next moves with treatment. But I think it'll largely be dependent on what the antibody test comes back as. So if you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I know there's a lot of people watching these videos who are subscribed, and it does help with YouTube and whether YouTube recommends these videos or not to other people. If you could do that, that would be great. And I'll catch you in the next video.